Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live. It is a pandemic Monday, and we have with us today our guest reader, Oscar de las Salas. Welcome, Oscar. You'll be reading Love in the Time of Cholera in English, of course, first. But before that, we have a little announcement today. I'm going to throw up here. With that, we have a flash sale, Virtual Flex tickets available now. And you can read the banner at the bottom of your screen for that information. Also with that, would like to share that the in-person season is sold out, but if you would like to be on the wait list, and I highly recommend that, please contact us now at info@swshakespeare.org. For all that information. All tickets are final, first come, first serve. And the season is really fantastic. It's really great. I would suggest going to the website and all of that to check that out, and the Facebook, the Southwest Shakespeare Facebook page as well. Oscar, welcome with us today. What do you think about this season coming up?
It's very exciting, and it's I'm actually looking at the email that Mary Way sent us. So I'm following the masters I'm obedient to the masters. This is so great because by being responsible with all the CDC guidelines, we can go back to enjoy theater. We can go performances. So I think this is fantastic. For what I read, I'm reading through once again. It says that it's a special flash sale. It's $120 for the 7 events. That's correct, right? That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. I'm reading right. And it's $95 on the price, and it closes October 1st. So if I were you, I will most definitely get myself on the waiting list for what I see. But thank you for reminding us that, Bo.
What's that?
Thank you for reminding us that, and for the ticker down below.
Of course, yes. Where are we in Love in the Time of Cholera at this point?
Yes. So I'm going to continue reading Love in the Time of Cholera in English today. First, that's the book.
Then I will turn things over to you and let you get started there.
Thank you. So I hope you guys, or you, all of you who are listening today, the continuation of Love in the Time of Cholera. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you. Are following along, and for what I know, some of you have purchased the book, which is great. I'm really jazzed about this because I have received some emails and notes actually along. So if you want to follow along, and you did not started with us from the very beginning, this is the book. And the title is Love in the Time of Cholera, written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's a writer from Colombia. This is one of my favorite books, and that's why we decided to read the book this time. So I will urge you to purchase the book and follow along with us. The book itself takes us through a love. How to describe this better? Let me think. It's a love story. It's a novel, but it goes through a period of 50 years in Colombia during the 1900s, and it's a love that lasts 50 years. It's a man who's deeply in love with a woman. Her name is Fermina Daza, and he waits his entire life to declare his love for her and to get a chance of loving her. Beautiful book. And all of these happens during a pandemia, the cholera pandemia in Colombia. Very similar to what we're living today. a pandemic or a pandemia, a pandemic. So where are we in the book? So Lorenzo Daza, Fermina's Daza's dad, realizes that Florentino Ariza is being sending her little notes here and there, and they both have exchanged notes for quite some time. And in one of the notes of one of the letters, she promised him that they are going to marry later on in life, or when she's able to get out of the house, or however you want to put it. She promised him that they are going to wed, that there is a wedding about to happen. So Florentina Daza's dad, Lorenzo Daza, finds the notes, and he goes mad about it. And they proceed to go on a caravan and leave town to go all the way to the mountains behind a snow mountain in Colombia in the Caribbean. So they leave the coast of the Caribbean and they trek behind all these mountains to a little town. That town is called Valledupar. In that town, his um, brother-in-law lives, and that's where they're going to spend some time. And Fermina Daza reencounters herself with her cousin. An incredible encounter. You will read the reason why. We will know the reason why. So this is where we are. Remember, the name of the town is called Valledupar. Sorry for all of you that don't know much about Colombian geography, but I have to read the name of the town, Valledupar. After prolonged stay in Valledupar, they continued their journey through the foothills of the mountains, crossing flowering meadows and dreamlike mesas. And in all the villages, they were received as they had been in the first, with music and fireworks, and new conspirational cousins and punctual messages in the telegraph offices. Fermina Daza soon realized that the afternoon of their arrival in Valledupar had not been usual, but rather that in this fertile province, every day of the week was lived as if it were a holiday. The visitors slept wherever they happened to be at nightfall, and they ate wherever they happened to be hungry. For those were houses with open doors, where there was always a hammock hanging in a three-meat stew simmering on the stove in case guests arrived before the telegram announcing their arrival, as was almost always the case. So Florentino Ariza, who used to work on a telegram, who used to be a telegraphist, used to send telegrams through the little ports until they got to Fermina Daza. Interesting. He wanted to keep in contact with her. Hildebranda Sanchez, that's Fermina's cousin, accompanied side by side her cousin for the remainder of the trip, guiding her with joyful spirit through the tangled complexities of her blood to the very source of her origins. Fermina Daza learned about herself. She felt free for the first time. She felt herself befriended and protected, her lungs full of the air of liberty, which restored her tranquility and her will to live. In her final years, she would still recall the trip that, with the perverse lucidity of nostalgia, became more and more recent in her memory. One night, she came back from her daily walk stunned by the revelation that one could be happy not only without love, but despite it. The revelation alarmed her because one of her cousins had surprised her parents in conversation with Lorenzo Daza, who had suggested the idea of arranging the marriage of his daughter to the only heir to the fabulous fortune of Cleophas Moscote. Fermina Daza knew who he was. She had seen him in the plazas, pirouetting his perfect horses so rich with trappings so rich they seemed ornaments used for the mass. And he was elegant and clever and had dreamer's eyelashes that could make the stone sigh. But she compared him to her memory of poor emancipated Florentino Ariza, sitting under the almond trees in the little park, with the book of verses on his lap, and she did not find even the shadow of a doubt in her heart. In those days, Hildebranda Sanchez was delirious with hope after visiting a fortune teller whose clairvoyance had astonished her. Dismayed by her father's intentions, Fermina Daza also went to consult with her. The cards said that there was no obstacle in her future to a long and happy marriage. And that prediction gave her back her courage because she could not conceive of such a fortunate destiny with any man other than the one she loved. Exalted by that certainty, she assumed command of her fate. That, that was how the telegraphic correspondence with Florentino Ariza stopped being the concerto of intentions and illusory promises and became methodical and practical and more intense than ever. They set dates, established means, pledged their life to their mutual determination to marry without consulting anyone, wherever and however they could, as soon as they were together again. Fermina Daza considered this commitment so binding that the night her father gave her permission to attend her first adult dance in the town of Fonseca, she did not think it was decent to accept without a consent of her fiancé. Florentino Ariza was in the transient hotel that night, playing cards with Lotario Thugot, his boss, when he was told he had an urgent telegram on the line. It was the telegraph operator from Fonseca, the little town where she was, who had keyed in thought seven intermediate stations so that Fermina Daza could ask permission to attend the dance. When she obtained it, however, she was not satisfied with a simple affirmative answer, but asked for her proof that in fact that was Florentino Ariza operating the telegraph key, sorry, at the end of the other line. More astonished than flattered, he composed an identifying phrase. Tell her I swear by the crowned goddess. Fermina Daza recognized the password and stayed at her first adult dance until 7 in the morning, when she had to change in a rush order to be late for Mass. By then, she had more letters and telegrams in the bottom of her trunk than her father had taken away from her, and she learned to behave with the air of a married woman. Lorenzo Daza interpreted these changes in her manner as a proof that her distance and time had cured her of her juvenile fantasies. But he never spoke to her about his plans for the arranged marriage. Their relations had become fluid within the formal reserve that she had imposed since the expulsion of Aunt Eslastica. And this allowed them such comfortable modus vivendi that no one would have doubted that it was based on affection. It was at this time that Florentino Ariza decided to tell her in his letters of determination to salvage the treasure of the sunken galleon for her. Remember, we talked about this, the ship that is outside Cartagena that contains a lot of treasures. It was true, and it had come to him in a flash of inspiration One sunlit afternoon, when the sea seemed paved with aluminum because of the numbers of fish brought to the surface by the mulling, all the birds of the air were in an uproar because of the kill, and the fishermen had to drive them away with their oars so they would not have to fight with them for the fruit of that prohibited miracle. The use of the mullein plant to put the fish to sleep the use of the mullein plant to put the fish to sleep had been prohibited by law since the colonial times, but it continued to be a common practice among the fishermen of the Caribbean until it was replaced by dynamite. One of Florentino Ariza's pastime during Fermina Daza's journey was to watch from the jetties as the fishermen loaded their canoes with enormous nets filled with sleeping fish. At the same time, a gang of boys who swam like sharks asked curious bystanders to toss coins into the water so they could dive to the bottom of them, to the bottom for them. Oh my God, that's a practice that still happens today. There, these little kids that are in the port, they ask you for coins, throw them, and then dive all the way down to pick them up and put it in their mouth. Yikes. Anyway, one of Florentino Ariza's pastime during Fermina Daza's journeys was to watch from the jetties as the fishermen loaded their canoes with enormous nets filled with sleeping fish. At the same time, gang of boys who swam like sharks asked curious bystanders to toss coins into the water so they could dive to the bottom of them. They were the same boys who swam out to meet the ocean liners for that purpose, and whose skill in the art of diving had been the subject of so many tourist accounts written in the United States of Europe and Europe. Florentino Ariza had always known about them, even before he knew about love. But it had never occurred to him that perhaps they may be able to bring up the fortune from the galleon. It occurred to him that afternoon, and from the following Sunday until Fermina Daza's return, almost a year later, he had an additional motive of for delirium. After, after talking to him for only 10 minutes, Euclides, one of the boy swimmers, or Euclides in with American accent, in English, sorry, Euclides, one of the boy swimmers, became as excited as he was at the idea of an underwater exploration. Florentino Ariza did not reveal the whole truth of the enterprise, but he informed himself thoroughly regarding his abilities as a diver and navigator. He asked him if he could descend without air to a depth of 20 meters, and Euclides told him yes. He asked him if he was prepared to sail a fisherman canoe by himself in the open sea in the middle of a storm with no instruments other than his instinct, and Euclides told him yes. He asked him if he could find a specific spot 16 nautical miles to the northwest of the largest island in Sotavento archipelago, and Euclides told him yes. He asked him if he was capable of navigating by the stars at night, and Euclides told him yes. He asked him if he was prepared to do so for the same wages for fishermen paid him for helping them to fish. And Euclides told him yes, but with an additional 5 reales on Sundays. Reales was the gold coin or the coin at that time. He asked him if he knew how to defend himself against sharks, and Euclides told him yes. He had magic tricks to frighten them away. He asked him if he was able to keep a secret, even if they put him in torture chambers of the Inquisition, and Euclides told him yes. In fact, he did not say no to anything, and he knew how to say yes with so much conviction that there was no way to doubt him. Then the boy recounted expenses, renting a canoe, renting the canoe paddle, renting fishing equipment so that no one would suspect the truth behind the incursions. It was also necessary to take along food and a demijohn of fresh water, an oil lamp, a pack of tallow candles, and a hunter's horn to call for help in case of emergency. Euclides was about 12 years old, and he was fast and clever an incessant talker, with an eel's body that could saunter through a bull's eye. The weather had tanned his skin to such a degree that it was impossible to imagine his original color, and this made his big yellow eyes seem more radiant. And that's so true. The kids from the Caribbean, they have been tanned by the sun, and they are not either Afro Colombians, like really, really dark, or mulatto, which is kind of like a milky color. They're just some strange color in between because they are under the sun all the time. Florentino Ariza had decided on the spot that he was a perfect companion for an adventure of such magnitude, and they embarked without further delay to to the following Sunday. They sailed out of the fisherman's port at dawn, well provisioned and better disposed. Euclides almost naked, with only the linen cloth that he always wore, and Florentino Ariza with his frock coat, his tenebrous hat, his patent leather boots, the poet's bow at his neck, and a book to pass the time during the crossing of the islands. From the very first Sunday, he realized that Euclides was a good navigator as he was as a diver, and that he had astonishing knowledge of the character of the sea and the debris in the bay. He could not recount in his most unexpected detail the history of each rusting hulk of a boat. He knew the age of each boya, the origin of every piece of rubbish, the number of links in the chain with which the Spaniards closed up the entrance of the bay. Fearing that he might also know the real purpose of this expedition, Florentino Ariza asked him sly questions, and in this way he realized that Euclides did not have the slightest suspicion about the sunken galleon. Ever since he had first heard the story of the treasure in the transient hotel, Florentino Ariza had learned all he could about the habits of the galleons. He learned that the San Jose was not the only ship in the coral depths, in which, in fact, the flagship of the oh, Terra Firma fleet. There was a fleet. That's part of the real story. Sorry, I'm going to do a quick break here. There were several fleets that they were either bringing goods from Spain to the Americas, or taking the goods that Spaniards were taking away from the Americas in Spain. And this was one of the fleets, Terra Firma, and that's absolutely true. It's called Terra Firma Fleet, and I mean, all these notes are absolutely true. So if you are keen about history and um, Hispanic history and the conquest of the Americas, this I can talk to you more about this because there's more information here. But anyway, too much. Let's go back to this. The Terra Firma fleet and had arrived after May 1708, having sailed from the fair, legendary fair of Portobello in Panama, where he had taken on parts of his fortune 300 trunks of silver from Peru and Veracruz in Mexico, and 110 trunks of pearls gathered and counted on the island of Contadora. That's an island that Venezuela and Colombia keep fighting for. Contadora. We'll get back to that too. During the long month he had remained here, the days and nights had been devoted to popular fiestas, and the rest of the treasure intended to save the kingdom of Spain from poverty had taken aboard 116 trunks of emerald from Muzo and San Domenico and 30 million gold coins. Now I know where the money, where the treasure from Spain comes from. The terra firma fleet was composed of no less than 12 supply ships of varying sizes, and it set sail from this port traveling in the convoy with a French squadron that was heavily armed but still incapable of protecting the expedition from the accurate cannon shot of the English squadron under Commander Charles Wagger, who waited for it in Sotavento archipelago at the entrance to the bay. So the San Jose was not only was not the only sunken vessel, although there was no reliable documented record of how many had succumbed and how many had managed to escape the English fire. What was certain was that the flagship had been among the first to sink, along with the entire crew and the commander standing straight on the quarterdeck, and that she alone carried most of the cargo. Florentino Ariza had learned the route of the galleons from the navigation charts of the period, and he thought he had determined the site of the shipwreck. They left the bay between the two fortresses of Boca Chica, and after hours of sailing, they entered the interior still waters of the archipelago, in whose coral depth they could pick up sleeping lobsters with their hands. The air was so soft and the sea so calm and clear that Florentino Ariza felt as if he were his own reflection in the water. At the far end of the backwater, 2 hours from the largest island, was the site of the shipwreck. Suffocating in his formal clothes under the infernal sun, Florentino Ariza indicated to Euclides that he should try to dive to a depth of 20 meters and bring back anything he may find at the bottom. The water was so clear that he saw him moving below like a tarnished shark among the blue ones that crossed his path without touching him. Then he saw him disappear into a thicket of coral, and just when he thought that he could not possibly have any more air in his lungs, he heard his voice at his back. Euclides was standing on the bottom, with his arms raised in the water up to his waist. And so they continued exploring deeper sites, always moving toward the north, sailing over the indifferent manta rays, the timid squid, the rose bushes in the shadows, until Euclides concluded that they were wasting their time. If you don't tell me what you want to find, I don't know how I'm going to find it, he said. But he did not tell him. Then Euclides proposed to him that he take off his clothes and dive in with him, even if it was only to see that other sky below the world, the coral depths. But Florentino Ariza always said that God had made the sea to look at through the window, and he never learned to swim. A short while later, that afternoon, it grew cloudy, and the air turned cold and damp, and grew dark with so little warning that they had to navigate by the lighthouse to find the port. Before they entered to the bay, the enormous white ocean liner from France passed very close to them, all its lights blazing as it trailed a wake of tender stew and boiled cauliflower. They wasted 3 Sundays in this way, and they would have continued to waste them all if Florentino Ariza had not decided to share his secrets with Euclides, who then modified the entire search and then sailed along the channel of the galleons, more than 20 nautical leagues to the east of the spot that Florentino Ariza had decided on. Less than 2 months had gone by when one rainy afternoon out of sea, Euclid spent considerable time down in the bottom of the canoe that drifted so much that he had to swim almost half an hour to reach it because Florentino Ariza could not row it closer to him. When last he climbed on board, he took two pieces of woman's jewelry out of his mouth and displayed them as if they were a prize for his perseverance. What he recounted then was so fascinating that Florentino Ariza promised himself that he would learn to swim and dive as under the water as possible so he could see it with his own eyes. He said that in the spot, only 18 meters down, there were so many old sailing ships lying down on coral reefs that it was impossible to even calculate the number. And they were spread over so extensive area that you could not see to the end of them. He said that the most surprising thing was that none of the old wrecks afloat in the bay was in such a good condition as the sunken vessels. He said that there were several caravels with their sails still intact, and that the sunken ships were visible even on the bottom, for it seemed as if they had sunk along with their own space and time, so that they were still illuminated by the same 11 o'clock sun that was shining on Saturday, June 9th, when they went down. Chalking on the driving force of his imagination, he said that the easiest one to distinguish was the galleon of San Jose, for its name could be seen on the pop and in the gold letters. But it was also the ship most damaged by English artillery. He said that he had seen an octopus inside, more than 3 centuries old, whose tentacles emerged through the openings in the canyon and who had grown to such size in the dining room that one would have destroyed the ship to free him. He said that he had seen the body of a commander dressed for the battle and floating sideways inside the aquarium of the forecastle, and that if he had not dived down to the hold with his and that if he had not dived down to the hold with all its treasure, it was because he did not have enough air in his lungs. There were the proofs: an emerald earring and the medal of the Virgin that the chain was and the medal of the Virgin, the chain corroded by salt. That was when Florentino Ariza first mentioned the treasure to Fermina Daza in a letter he sent to Fonseca a short while before her return. The history of the sunken galleon was familiar to her because she had heard it so many times from Lorenzo Daza, her dad, who had lost both time and money trying to convince a company of German divers to join him in salvaging the sunken treasure. He would have persevered in the entire enterprise if several members of the Academy of History had not convinced him that the legend of the shipwrecked galleon had been invented by some brigand of Viceroy to hide his theft of treasure of the crown. In any case, Fermina Daza knew that the galleon lay beyond the reach of any human being, at a depth of 200 meters, not 20 meters claimed by Florentino Ariza. But she was so accustomed to his poetic excesses that she celebrated the adventure of the galleon as one of his most successful. Still, when they continued to receive other letters with still more fantastic details, written with as much seriousness as his promises of love, she had to confess to Hildebranda Sanchez, her cousin, her fear that her bedazzled sweetheart must have lost his mind. During his time, Euclides surfaced with so many proofs of his tale that it was no longer a question of playing with earrings and rings scattered amid the coral, but of the financing of a major enterprise to salvage the 50 ships with the cargo of Babylonian treasure. Then what had to happen sooner or later happened. Florentino Ariza asked his mother for help in bringing his adventure to a successful conclusion. All she had to do was to bite the metal settings and look at the gems made of glass against the light to realize that someone was taking advantage of her son's innocence. Euclides went down on his knees and swore to Florentino that he had done nothing wrong, but he was not seen the following Sunday in the fisherman's port or anywhere else ever again. The only thing Florentino is a salvage from that disaster was the loving shelter of the lighthouse. He had gone there in Euclid's canoe on the night when a storm at sea took him by surprise, and from that time on, he would go there in the afternoons to talk the lighthouse keeper about the innumerable marvels on the land and water that the keeper had knowledge of. It was the beginning of a friendship that survived the many changes of the world. Florentino Ariza learned to feed the fire, first with loads of wood, and then with large earthen jars of oil, before electrical energy came to us. He learned to direct the light and augmented with mirrors, and on several occasions when the lighthouse keeper could not do so, he stayed to keep and watch over the night at sea from the tower. He learned to know the ships by their voices, by the size of their lights in the horizon, and to sense that something of them came back to him in the flashing beacon of the lighthouse. During the day, above all on Sundays, there was another kind of pleasure. In the districts of viceroys, where the wealthy people in the old where the wealthy people of the old city lived, the women beaches were separated from those of the men by a plaster wall. One lay to the right and the other to the left of the lighthouse. And so the lighthouse keeper installed spyglass through which one could contemplate women beach by paying a centavo, just one coin. Without knowing they were being observed, the young society ladies displayed themselves to the best of their ability in ruffled bathing suits and slippers and hats that hid their bodies almost as much as their street clothes, as the street clothes did, and were less attractive besides. Their mothers, sitting out in the sun, wicker rocking chairs, wearing the same dresses, the same feather hats, and holding the same organdy parasols as they had at the high mass, watch over watch over them from the shore, for the fear that men from neighboring beaches would see their daughters under the water. The reality was that one could not see anything more or anything more exciting than the spyglass that one could see on the street. But there were many clients who came every Sunday to wrangle over the telescope, the pure delight of testing the insipid forbidden fruits of the wall area that was denied for them. Florentino Ariza was one of them, more from boredom than for pleasure. But it was not because of the additional that he became that he became a good friend of the lighthouse keeper. The real reason was that after Fermina Daza rejected him when he contracted the fever of many desperate loves in his effort to replace her. It was in the lighthouse and nowhere else that he lived his happiest hours and found the best consolation for his misfortunes. It was the place he loved most, so much so that for years he tried to convince his mother and later his uncle, Leo the XII, to help him buy it. For in those days, the lighthouses in the Caribbean were private property, and their owners charged ships according to the size, the right to enter to the port. Florentino Ariza thought it was the way honor. It was the way. It was the only. Sorry. It was the honorable only way to make a profit out of poetry. But neither his mother nor his uncle agreed with him. And it was the time he had resources to do it on his own. The lighthouses had become property of the state. None of these dreams was in vain, however. The tale of galleon and the novelty of the lighthouse helped to alleviate the absence of Fermina Daza. And then, when he least suspected, he received the news of her return. In fact, after a prolonged stay in Riohacha, another town, Lorenzo Daza decided to come home. And it was not the most benign season on the ocean, due to the December trade winds and the historic schooner, the, the only one that would risk the crossing, might find itself blown by a contrary wind back to the port where it had started. And that is what happened. Fermina Daza spent an agonized night vomiting bile, strapped to her bunk in a cabin that resembled a tavern latrine, not only because of its oppressive narrowness, but also because of the pestilential stench and the heat. The motion was so strong that she had the impression several times that the straps on the bed will fly apart. On the deck, she heard fragments of shouted lamentations and sounded like a shipwreck, and her father's fingers snoring in the next bunk added yet another ingredient to her terror. For the first time in almost 3 years, she spent an entire night awake without thinking for even one moment of Florentino Ariza, while he, on the other hand, lay sleepless in his hammock in the back of the room, counting the eternal minutes one by one until her return. At dawn, the wind suddenly died down and the sea grew calm, and Fermina Daza realized that she had slept despite her devastating sickness, because the noise of the anchor chains awoke her. Then she loosened the straps and went to the porthole, hoping to see Florentino Ariza in the tumult of port. But all she saw were the customs sheds among the palm trees, gilded by the first rays of the sun, and to the rooting boards of the dock in Riohacha, where his schooner had set sail the night before. The rest of the day, it was like a hallucination. She was in the same house where she had been until yesterday, receiving the same visitors who had said goodbye to her, talking about the same things, bewildered by the impression that she was reliving a piece of life she had already lived. It was such a faithful reception that Fermina Daza trembled at the thought that the schooner trip would be a repetition too, for the mere memory of it terrified her. However, the only possible means of returning home was 2 weeks on a mule back of the mountains in circumstances even more dangerous than the first time, since a new civil war had begun in the Andean state of Cauca, spreading through the Caribbean provinces. At that time, there was a war about to happen in Colombia, Civil War. And so that at 8 o'clock that night, she was once again accompanied to the port by the same troop of noisy relative, shredding the same tears of farewell with the same jumble of last-minute gifts and packages that did not fit in the cabins. When it was time to sail, the men in the family slaughtered the schooner with a volley of shoots firing to the air, and Lorenzo Daza responded from the deck with 5 shots from his revolver. Fermina Daza fears dissipated because the wind was favorable at night, and there was a scent of flowers at sea that helped her to sleep soundly without the safety straps. She dreamed that she was seeing Florentino Ariza again, and he took off the face that she had always seen on him because, in fact, it was a mask. But his real face was identical to the false one. This is a fantastic analogy. She got up very early, intrigued by the enigma of the dream, and she found her father drinking mountains of coffee with brandy in the Capitan's bar. His eye twisted by alcohol, but he did not show the slightest hint of uncertainty regarding their return. They were coming into port. The schooner slipped in silence through the labyrinth of sailing ships anchored in the cove of the public market, whose stench could be smelled several leagues out into the sea, and the dawn was saturated by steady drizzle that soon broke into a full-edged downpour. Standing watch on the balcony of the telegraph office, Florentino Ariza recognized the schooner. He sails disheartened by the rain, as it crossed Las Animas Bay and anchored by the market pier. The morning before, he had waited until 11 o'clock when he learned through a casual telegram of the contrary winds that had delayed the schooner. And on this day, he had returned to his vigil at 4 o'clock in the morning. He continued to wait, not taking his eyes off the launch that carried Ashore to the few passengers who had who had decided to disembark despite of the storm. Whole, halfway across, halfway across, the lounge ran aground, and most of them had abandoned the ship and splashed through the mud to the pier. Sorry, this is just a part when he realizes she is back, and even through the rain, he wants to make sure that he's on the port waiting for her. At 8 o'clock, after they had waited in vain for the rain to stop, a black stevedore in the water, a black stevedore in water up to his waist, received Fermina Daza at the rail of the schooner and carried her ashore in her arms. But she was so drenched that Florentino Ariza did not recognize her. She herself was not aware of how much she had matured during the trip until she walked into her closed house and at once undertook the heroic task of making it livable once again, with the help of Gala Placidia, her maid. Oh, there is the black servant, not her maid, the black servant, who came back from her old slave quarters as soon as she was told of their return. Firmina Daza was no longer the only child, both spoiled and tyrannized by her father, but the lady and mistress of an empire of dust and cobwebs that could be saved only by the strength of an invisible love. She was not intimidated because she felt herself inspired by an exalted courage that would have enabled her to move the world. The very night of their return, while they were having hot chocolate and crullers at the large kitchen table, her father delegated to her the authority to run the house, and he did so with much familiarity as it were the sacred right. I turn over you the keys of your life, he said. She, with all her 17 years behind her, accepted with a firm hand. Oh my gosh, she was 17, that's right. Wow. Consciousness that every inch of liberty she won was for the sake of love. The next day, after a night of bad dreams, she suffered her first sense of displeasure at being home when she opened the balcony and saw again the sad result in the little park, the statue of the decapitated hero, the marble bench where Florentino Ariza used to sit with his book of verses. So no longer she thought of him as the impossible sweetheart, but as the certain husband to whom she belonged, heart and soul. We have a few minutes left. She felt the heavy weight of the time they had lost while she was away. She felt how hard it was to be alive and how much love she was going to need to let her man as God demanded, to love her man as God demanded. She was surprised he was not in the little park and as he had as he had seen as he had been so many times despite the rain, and that she had received no sign of any kind from him, not even a premonition, and she was shaken by the sudden idea that he had died. But she put aside the evil thought at once, for in the recent frenzy of telegrams regarding her imminent return, they had forgotten to agree on a way to continue communicating once she was home. The truth is that Florentino Ariza was sure she had not returned until the telegraph operator in Riohacha, the other city, confirmed that they had embarked on Friday aboard the very same schooner that did not arrive the day before, of contrary to the winds, so that during the weekend he watched for any sign of light in the house, and at dusk on Monday he saw through the windows a light that moved them through the house, a light that moved through the house, and that was extinguished a little after 9 in the bedroom with the balcony. He did not sleep, victim of the same fearful nausea that he had disturbed first nights that, that had disturbed his first nights of love. Transito Ariza, his mother, arose with the first roosters, alarmed that her son had gone out to the patio at midnight and had not come back inside. And she did not find him in the house. He had gone to wander along the jetties, reciting love poetry into the wind and crying with joy until daybreak. At 8 o'clock, he was sitting under the arches of the parish cafe, delirious with fatigue, trying to think of how to send his welcome to Fermina Daza, when he felt himself shaken by a seismic tremor that tore his heart. It was she crossing the plaza of the cathedral with with Gala Placidia, who was carrying the baskets for their marketing. Yeah, they were going to the market. And for the first time, she was not wearing her school uniform. She was taller than when she left, more polished and intense. Her beauty purified by the restraint of maturity. Her braid had grown in, but instead of letting it hang down her back, she wore it twisted over her left shoulder. And that simple change had erased all girlish traces from her. Florentino Ariza sat bedazzled until the child of his vision had crossed the plaza, looking to neither left nor right. But then the same irresistible power that had paralyzed him obliged him to hurry after her when she turned the corner of the cathedral and was lost in the deafening noise of the market's rough cobblestones. He followed her without letting himself be seen, watching the ordinary gestures, the grace, the premature maturity of being he loved most in the world, and whom he was seeing for the first time in her natural state. He was amazed by fluidity, fluidity. There you go. which she had, which she made her way through the world, through the crowd, while Gala Placidia, the servant, bumped into the people and became entangled with her baskets, and had to run to keep up with her. She navigated the disorder of the street in her own time and space, not colliding with anyone, like a bat in the darkness. She had often been to the market with her aunt and Scholastica, but they made only minor purchases, since her father himself took charge of provision in the household, not only with furniture and food, but even with women's clothing. So this first excursion was for her a fascinating adventure idealized in her girlhood dreams. She paid no attention to the urgings of the snake charmers who offered her a syrup for eternal love, or the pleas of the beggars lying in doorways with their running sores, or to the false Indian who tried to sell her a trained alligator. She made a long and detailed tour with no planned itinerary, stopping with no other motive than her unhurried delight in the spirit of the thing. She entered every doorway where there was something for sale. Everywhere she found something that increased her desire to live. She relished the aroma of vetiver in the cloth in the great chests. She wrapped herself in embossed silks. She laughed. She laughed at her own laughter when she saw herself in the full-length mirror in the golden wire, disguised as a woman from Madrid, with a comb in her hand and a fan painted with flowers. In the store that sold imported foods, she lifted off the lid of barrel of pickled herring that reminded her of nights in the Northeast when she was a very little girl in San Juan de la Cienega. She sampled an Alicante sausage that tasted of licorice, and she bought two of the Saturday's breakfast, as well as some slices of cod and a jar of red currants in aguardiente, firewater. In the spice shop, she crushed leaves of sage and oregano in the palms of her hands for the future pleasure of smelling them, and brought a handful of cloves, another star of anise, and one each of finger root and juniper. And she walked away with tears of laughter in her eyes because the smell of the cayenne pepper made her sneeze so much. In the We're about to finish. Sorry, I passed time. It's 1 o'clock. In the French cosmetics shops, and she bought Reuters soaps and balsam water. They put a touch of the latest perfume from Paris behind her ear and gave her a breath tablet to use after smoking. That's right, people used to smoke, and the smell was trapped in their clothes and their hair and all that. So they had to use all sorts of perfumes and lotions. So I'm going to leave it here. It's a little rough today. There were some words that I didn't recognize. I mean, this is written in Old Spanish too, or it's written in Castilian Spanish with words from the time, and there's some words that I just didn't recognize. I'll get back to them and get them translated for you or get meanings to them. But what we're going through right now is just that recount of their love. Florentino, Arisa, and Fermina Daza's love. So if you want to send me questions, I have some questions that I want to answer to all of you. Please send them to me. I'm responding to some of them as they come, either email or messages. But I will make sure to respond to some of your questions, to answer to some of your questions and give you the responses that you are waiting. So this is book, Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I see you next Monday. In the meantime, down the sticker, it says the season is sold out in person ticket. If you would like to be on waitlist, you can do so. Contact Southwest Shakespeare and then Southwest Shakespeare Company, or send an email to info@southwestshakespeare.org, and make sure that you put yourself on a waiting list, um, and enjoy what is coming for Southwest Shakespeare. See you on Friday, 12 noon, for reading in Spanish, and I see you next Monday at noon for reading in English. Thank you for your time. I hope you are enjoying this book and all the series Southwest Shakespeare is working on for all of you. Thank you for your patronage and support. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.